I don't want to speak about any more specifics and steal the thunder from our keynoter, who is Peter Blackmore, the president and CEO. But I'd like to just let you know he joined ShoreTel in December 2010 with the goal of scaling global operations and to accelerate the company's growth. He brings 30 years of experience in tech companies such as UT Starcom, HP, and Unisys. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, everybody. How are you? It's a pleasure to be here. My talk is all about change, and I like to be provocative. Rich teed it up very well, but our industry, the voice over IP and unified communications industry, has seen a lot of change since its inception. My premise to you all today is we shall see more change in this industry in the next 24 months since the introduction of voice over IP. It is that dramatic. And what's causing the change? If you follow business, there are really three things that cause change. One is new technologies, and we have a raft of new technologies available to us in the unified communication space, and I'll talk about some of the ones I think are most relevant. The next is a business model change. And what I mean by that, and because Austin is the home of Dell, they produced a brand new business model in the PC industry. They went direct and changed that industry forever, and the rest was history. But that type of business model change is happening in unified communications. And the third change driver is very much outside influences. And the reference to Apple and the smartphone is very relevant, because those devices, properly implemented within a unified communications environment, are themselves driving a lot of difference in end-user experience, end-user demands, and fundamentally will change the industry. So we're at an inflection point. To reinforce that, I'd just like you to think about categories and S-curves. And I'm sure you've all seen S-curves. You all understand the premise. But basically, you get category evolutions, and every time you get that fundamental shift to the next category stage, you have winners and losers and a very different industry. To use an example, and again, I think it's very relevant to what's happening to some extent in our own industry, if you go back and look at Salesforce automation. In the early days, you had people who had very modest CRM implementations, and then it extended to the household names that basically, in the next category, established the industry. People such as Siebel, Oracle, SAP, and so on. And then Salesforce.com came along, and in a remarkable short period of time, created a completely different business model, obviously using the cloud, and Siebel as a standalone company no longer existed. It was part of the many acquisitions that Larry Ellison made at Oracle. Salesforce.com is still standalone, vibrant, and undeniably the thought leader in that whole industry. It happened very fast. If you look at our industry, some similar things are happening. If you go back 15 years to the first category, you have the traditional multiplex vendors. You then moved to the introduction of internet telephony, pioneered by Cisco, Nortel, and others. And some of those names no longer exist, the most obvious one being Nortel. You then move to the unified communications environment. And although unified communications has been marketed and promoted for some time, my premise to you is that it's still in its infancy. Yes, we can integrate Microsoft Outlook or Google Mail or Apple into a presence environment. We can do many other things. We can integrate video. But we still have not really lived up to the full potential of unified communications. So you have an environment now where you have the traditional premise vendors, some like ourselves who have fully embraced cloud and also still fully embraced premise, by the way. You have a whole raft of new cloud vendors. There's an enormous number. There are 80 in the United States alone, which may surprise you, 80 cloud companies, some of them very small, some of them much larger. And then some new players such as Microsoft entering the market. It's very fast changing, very dynamic, and it's only just beginning. As this shakes out, I think a number of the premise vendors will move away, rather like Siebel did when Salesforce.com attacked. And I would put it that a number of them that aren't on the slide, and perhaps the one that is on the slide, will not necessarily be in the premise space in 2 years' time. We certainly will. And the cloud companies, you can't obviously have 80 competitors, even in a fast-growing market. You're going to see rapid consolidation. So there'll be a lot of change in the premise market and a lot of change in the cloud market, but you have to look at this as one market. Yes, there are two ways of providing a service to a customer, but they are one market, not two markets. So let's look at some of the things that are driving this inflection point. From a technology standpoint, virtualization has been accepted by almost all CTOs and CIOs. So on a premise-based installation, you now have the choice of virtualizing your voice system, in other words, having a centralized set of applications in a data center, and you still have the choice of having a distributed environment. And there's room for both, because it depends on the topography of the organization that is buying voice. It depends partly on how they manage data centers and how they run their business. But it has been virtualization has fundamentally given a new dimension. So that is one driver. The other one is SIP trunking, which changes the simplicity of the way you can connect the phone at the end user into the system. That is driving a lot of change, different business models, and it's obviously been around now for 18 months, 2 years, but the latest generation of SIP technology, which we've also embraced, is driving a lot of change. You then take the smartphone and bring your own devices. We entered the mobile unifications communication market 2 years ago when we bought a company called Agito, and I'm delighted we did. Because you've learned so much by having that core technology embedded in your services. And what you learn is that the end user experience from those 2 years ago to now has had to be fundamentally improved. Apple, if you like, has not only been hugely successful with its iPad and iPhone and iPod, but it's also educated all of us not to accept anything less than fantastic graphical user interface and intuitive ease of use. And therefore, the devices such as the smartphones, whether it's an Apple or an Android, when you put them in a unified communications environment, they have to live up to that expectation. And I think they've improved a lot in the last 2 years, but there's still a way to go. But the user is also in a position of power compared with 2 years ago that is having a lot of influence on what companies buy and how they implement technology. The bring your own device, BYOD, is very prevalent. Probably initially, CIOs fought against it because it had all sorts of implications and consequences in terms of numbers of devices, security, but such was the user power that it's flipped. And almost every company embraces a variety of technologies to enable people to be more productive. And that's the key point. It's not just ease of use, but it's the business value that comes from that ease of use. And if you're more productive employees, they're probably going to stay longer with you. They're going to be far more effective as a workforce. And therefore, whatever resistance there was in the beginning has rapidly eroded. So that is the factor from outside the UC industry, but having a huge impact on the UC industry. You then have the advent of cloud, and that is both a technology, but also a business model. It gives users a very interesting choice. You have perhaps a 1,000-seat organization. Do they put on a premise environment, which is obviously an upfront payment? The return on that payment typically for UC is less than 3 years, so it's a very good ROIC. And then once it's paid up, you obviously have your ongoing maintenance and support costs. The alternative is you pay monthly. And the way cloud works, as I'm sure you know, you have 1,000 seats. You would say so much per seat, and that depends on the functionality of each user has. So your ARPU per seat can be $20, $30, $50, depending on the environment you're offering each end user. And you pay 1 month in advance, and that's it. Number of seats, 1 month in advance. If you don't like the system, you can change it. Yes, you probably have a contract for 12 months, but how many people are going to argue with you if you walk away from that contract? The vendor obviously wants to get that return, but the user has the power. You also have the ability to try pilots, to move very quickly, so you can test things in a new area and make a choice, because the investment is minimal, other than training your people in terms of the technology they're using. And then the services, at the moment, the cloud UC companies obviously offer a more limited feature set than the premise-based systems have been around for a number of years, but that is also rapidly changing. An example would be we had the mobile software on our premise-based system. When we bought M5, now called ShoreTel Sky, it took us 90 days to take that software, put it in the cloud, charge $10 a seat, and off you go. 90 days. And people could then say, okay, I'm going to try that environment on my cloud system, and the take-up has been very rapid. So the users have got a different business model, a different way of working, and it's certainly in the lower end of the market, below 500-seat companies, it is taking off like a firestorm. We've only had one full quarter of ShoreTel Sky, because we closed the transaction on March the 23rd, so we had the last quarter, and the growth was 43% compared with a year ago, 43%, and we were expecting 30. So it's just taking off like a train. So the users clearly like the choice. So these are the parameters you have in the market. And there aren't many industries where there's that much change going on all of a sudden. So embracing this change, understanding it, pointing the right direction will pick the winners or losers. We are at an absolute inflection point in our industry. Let's talk about the end users and the workplace. It's something we're beginning to take for granted, but again, it's I think, very interesting just to observe and watch the way we all work. Work is no longer a location. We're in Austin today, it could be New York tomorrow, it could be Singapore next week. And you take your productivity tools with you, and you expect to be equally productive regardless of the location, and your access to what makes you effective as an employee needs to be the same. And that is a revolution, because just going back 2 years ago, it didn't happen. And it's accelerating, and it's due to the advent of the smart devices we all have access to, plus the productivity tools that are now being enabled on those devices. This trend is here to stay. It will continue. It's not just bring your own device. It's far more deep-rooted and far more fundamental in that. And it's something that separates the successful companies from the not-so-successful companies, and ultimately from the successful countries and the not-so-successful countries. because you make your people productive, whether it's education or productivity tools, you change the dynamic. You absolutely have changed the dynamic. And traditionally, IT has been guilty of providing technology solutions which suited the technical specifications. In other words, you met the spec. But you didn't necessarily satisfy your users in the true sense of the word. The CI would accept it because it met the spec. The business manager would accept it because it met the spec. But were they that passionate, that excited? With the end user, I put it to you that the CIO and certainly the business manager will want something that really excites their employees, makes them want to be more effective, stay longer in the company, and win. So you have to satisfy the end user, the business manager, and of course, the IT specialists. And that's something the voice and unified communication industry needs to embrace. That is a fundamental change. And therefore, the end user is driving that result. The benefit is productivity. Very hard for an individual contributor to be fully productive unless the team that they work with, and it could be across functions, it could be across geographies, because in a sense, there is nobody such as an individual contributor. You all rely on some other aspect of the organization to make your success. And then teams obviously get it. They have to be productive. They have to have the information. Productivity needs new generations of collaboration toolset. The current generation of collaboration, not bad. It's effective, but it's nothing what we need. Does it enable analytical tools, diagnostic tools to be pulled up into the device you're taking with you and simply accessed, simply used? Can you communicate that? And above all, is it simple and is it intuitive? Gone are the days where you'll struggle with your device and say, gosh, and then phone up support and say, finally get it, I know how to use it. Those days are gone. You will demand that it's intuitive, simple to use, therefore your collaboration tool set becomes effective. How many of you have looked at a desk phone today and can use all the features on that desk phone? Very, very few. That's because it's not intuitive. It needs to be. So this team productivity leading to collaboration, leading to really simple to use, is the Holy Grail. It's something that ShoreTel we fundamentally believe in, hence our tagline, brilliantly simple. We believe we have a leadership position, but we're also very honest with ourselves. We aren't yet meeting that endpoint and need to get there really fast. So I'm going to suggest 3 keys to success that will differentiate the winners from the losers. And they're building on what I've been talking about. The user focus is fundamental. Ignore that at your peril. But it needs different things in the engineering and R&D teams. Graphical user interface is really, really important. Intuitive ways of working are really, really important. Understanding the collaboration tool sets that link every aspect. I'll give you another example. Video is part of the unified communications paradigm. We partner with people like Lifesize and Polycom. Connecting video is getting better, and we've just announced in ShoreTel 13 different tool sets to enable it better. But it's something that, even though I sort of test myself, I'll tend to sort of pick up the phone to the administrator or my assistant and say, well, just come and connect this for me. And I'm sure if you're honest, many of you are the same. That shouldn't be necessary. I think that part of the industry is also, interestingly, responding to this user focus. And with the advent of cloud, you have video at a fraction of the cost of a premise system, and then if you can make sure the interface and simplicity of use is as effective as the rest, that will also become an even more vibrant part of the unified communication solution. So user focus, meeting the requirements of the end user and the business manager are essential. Another example would be, how do you link applications into unified communications? If you think about voice, it is actually the most powerful tool we have. But we don't tend to capture the voice, the information that is in the voice. We tend to rely on data. As you move to the next generation, you can absolutely do that. One of the examples we use in our cloud solution is we've integrated Salesforce.com into our cloud solution and vice versa, so that the business manager, in this case the head of sales, knows they've got a really cool cloud app in Salesforce.com. They also know that they're now communicating through the voice system and can capture all the data and move it automatically into Salesforce.com. So this embracing of new ways of working to meet this end user focus is only just starting. And I put it to you that that tight integration, so unified communications, become much broader, much more effective, and really at the hub of what makes companies successful is going to transform the industry. Alongside that comes mobility. You pick your tool set, your device set, you're on the road, but it's no longer just the road warriors amongst us, it is all of us. And we're not going to do battle with the technology. We expect the technology to help us and be simple to use. So this concept of the desk phone in your pocket that has the functionality and the productivity and collaboration tools that you use and all of the interfaces will both enable that end user focus, but also needs to really challenge the engineering teams and the implementation teams to embrace this. We have 2 years of experience with our mobility offering. We've learned a lot, still learning. And it's not just the graphical user interface and the simplicity of use, it's the security, it's enabling people to do all the provisioning correctly because you're Wi-Fi enabled, not just 3, 4G enabled, making sure that channel partners and customers know how to do that. So when you roll this out, you just get a rich, good experience rather than, gosh, I really like it, but there's this but and there's that but. You can't afford any of the buts. So if you build that mobility capability alongside the end user experience, you've got a win-win. And the third is the cloud and SaaS model. If you look at the market research analysts, and they've got as good a lens as anyone, some of them, like IDC, say that the cloud voice over IP market will equal the size of the premise market by 2015. That's only in 3 years' time. Now, even if they're off by a couple of years, they're not going to be off in the end result. The point here is that there is a role for premise. It's not going to go away. There is a much larger role for cloud, and you're going to have an equal choice. And we, as leaders in the UC industry, have got to embrace both and provide both. It's a different business model. It's a different provisioning strategy. And yes, at the moment, it's the smaller end of the market which is accepting that and embracing it and growing, but I think it'll go right throughout the industry. The other things it does is start to suggest alternative solutions. Why does it always have to be either or? Why 100% cloud, 100% premise? That's fine, by the way, if that's what the CTO and CIO wants, great. But how about, I believe that I've got this large headquarters and I just feel more confident having a premise-based PBX, but I have all of these mobile people out there, why not put mobility in the cloud? And then you just provision that on a per-seat basis, depending on the size of your mobile offering. Doesn't affect what you've done on premise, but it's completely seamless. Why not? Another example would be the topography of the organization. You may have remote sales offices, satellite divisions, some international premises, and you still perhaps want that premise-based headquarters, but you'd like the rest to have a choice of cloud-enabled or premise-enabled. And you don't want to have to do battle because the call control is different, or there's some kludgy connection between the two, so the user's got to work out which system they're on. You want it to be completely seamless, simple to organize, and embraced. Why not? So I do think you'll end up with what Gartner would call a hybrid technology, a choice of both platforms to meet the requirements of the user, seamlessly connected, very easy to use, and with an overall better business model for the customer. I also think you'll see unified call control, because that is the way you can really make sure both environments are simply connected and you can give that flexibility of choice to your customers. So I have no doubt that cloud will accelerate very fast. I have no doubt that premise will continue to be a really important part. But unless you can provide that range of services I've suggested, you won't win in this industry. You have to embrace both. Your engineers have to embrace both. There are other things that we're beginning to see. You can launch a cloud application, as I said, with mobility in 90 days. And then you can also decide perhaps the first tranche of that application has a feature set which is adequate, but not the full feature set you'd like. You can add those and other features in another 90 days. You update the code in the cloud. All your users are suddenly connected with the latest application set. And that is so different from a premise-based release of a big operating system. And then you've got to update each user a set at a time. So it enables companies like us to provide new applications even faster. And the paradigm shift is you have to get your engineering teams to accept you can do this in 3 months. It's not a release every 6 or 9 months. And you can keep accelerating to provide a rich user experience. And you get that very dynamic feedback from customers, which really makes organizations very successful, because you're testing, getting input, testing, getting input. And you can do that cycle much faster than you can on pure premise. So it keeps you a really competitive organization. So I think there's huge change. I'm personally very excited to be part of it. It's invigorating. And we are doing our best to move faster than the companies ever moved before, because we want to seize the opportunity and really believe that we've got a vision of the future. So I'll leave you with one thought. It's from a much cleverer executive than I am, but it's only the paranoid survive. And in the UC industry, I think that's very, very relevant today. Thank you all very much.